Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to be talking with somebody who wants to be in a major position to help all the people of Milford and Massachusetts and our country. So let's first start with an introduction.
Thank you, Al. It's great to be here with so many great candidates and political leaders have sat over time. I really appreciate you having me on the show here with you.
Fundamental question. I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, of course, that's the great question of every campaign. And I'll tell you, it comes from this space, Al, for me. My wife and I are absolutely, well, first of all, we say we believe in the strength and promise of America. We believe in freedom and liberty and dignity for all. But we believe that the strength and promise of America and freedom and liberty and dignity for all is only best realized when we are united. So it must be a strong potential realizing united America. We're in an era of division, and the lack of unity is historic in nature. And Senator Warren is the divider-in-chief of the Senate currently. And I want to take my lifetime service record of bringing people together across racial, ethnic, political divides and bring that to the people of Milford, the people of Massachusetts, to demonstrate a better way, a way in which we can all work together, whether it's red, blue, Republican, Democrat. I'm indifferent on that subject. What I want are solutions for people, and solutions for hardworking citizens of Milford, for the people of Massachusetts, will only be delivered when government is working for them. But I'll go further on that subject, which is it goes deeper as to the actual structure of Washington, I believe. So it's not only dividers like Senator Warren, it's the fundamental structure. So I'm in favor of structural changes that will help Washington function better. Number one, term limits. I'll make a term limits pledge. And I want to urge, Washington politicians to take that on and finally do something about that. Two, the idea that if you don't do your job as a senator or as a congressman, you shouldn't get paid. Don't pass a budget, don't go home and get your paycheck. You don't get paid because that's the way jobs work. And three, a structural change. I'm going to bring together a caucus of Republicans and Democrats, a problem solvers caucus, reaching across the aisle to make sure that we're solving problems for all Americans. Final point I'll say, and why I care so deeply about this campaign, why I'm in this campaign, why my wife and I decided at the beginning of 2017 I should lean into this and take up this effort against Senator Warren, is I really believe in as I said earlier, the strength and promise of America, freedom, liberty, dignity for all. And I realize that the system, Washington, the economy, is not necessarily working for everybody. And that as a consequence, the sense of purpose, the sense of dignity is not being felt by all. And I want to lean into the problems of the day with the knowledge that leadership should help people feel that freedom, liberty, and dignity for all rather than detract from it and take away, as the Washington leadership is doing today.
Now, what you're talking about feels like the antithesis of what happens in Washington. Red and blue won't talk. You're talking about coming together. I mean, it reminds me of the days of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. Two of the most opposite political views, but yet they could respect each other enough to actually work together.
Exactly.
I mean, do you think you can pull that off?
The American people are desperate for that. The people of Massachusetts, I believe, are desperate for that. It's like we're in an arid desert right now. People want just a sip of water, of people working together in ways that don't involve name calling or attacks to the person, ways that people are just saying, look, we may agree to disagree on certain points, but ultimately, we're together as Americans. We're going to find solutions for people. Tip O'Neill's a great example. Ted Kennedy was a great example. I didn't agree with those guys ideologically. They came at this from a different bent. But Tip O'Neill famously worked with Reagan. Ted Kennedy famously worked with Orrin Hatch and with Jesse Helms. I was just talking in D.C. the other day to a former Jesse Helms staffer, and he said, "Look, Jesse, Senator Helms, for the younger folks in the audience, he was a famously very, very, very conservative senator from North Carolina." And this staffer was telling me, well, Senator Helms and Senator Kennedy both agreed that they disagreed about 99% of the time. But they found the places where they actually could either, one, make common cause, they actually did agree, or they could compromise to achieve something. Senator Kennedy passed 300 bills in his, long career. I agree to them, disagreed with them ideologically, but I agree with the approach that he took, which was to figure out a way to get things done for the good of citizens of Massachusetts. And that is what distinguishes that old era of Massachusetts politician from the breed that we have right now. Senator Warren leading a caucus of folks from the Democratic side that are not working to get things done.
Well, it seems like both parties have disappointed me as a voter, as a resident of Milford, because nobody seems to be reaching across. They all blame each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I get a kick out of it because we have the Liberal View show, we have the Dems coming on, we have the Republicans coming on, the Conservative, and they both point at each other for the same reasons.
That's exactly right.
When the whole thing came up about the Supreme Court appointment, my God, the Democrats this time did exactly, even worse in my mind, what the Republicans did, saying, we don't care who you nominate, we're saying no. Well, wait a minute. How will you ever get a centralist? You're telling a party, I'm not going to talk to you, so why wouldn't you pick somebody on the extreme side?
Exactly. The system is currently set up to incent extreme behavior. Now, that said, not everybody is acting in extremist ways, but Senator Warren is one of the worst offenders. She is, as I often say, the divider in chief of the Senate. For example, just recently, Federal Reserve Chair was voted on by her committee, and she was the only one of either the Republicans or the Democrats to vote thumbs down. So Senator Warren, time and again in this most recent vote, and countless other votes, for instance, for a variety of cabinet appointments, voted thumbs down on the appointment under consideration. Well, it's fine. No one's going to argue with somebody from time to time saying, I don't see eye to eye with a particular appointment or somebody under consideration. But if you're voting against 90+% of the cabinet appointments of a new administration, there's something fundamentally wrong. Something's broken there, because elections have consequences. We know that, right? The president gets to select a cabinet, and the cabinet actually is something which is good for the service of all Americans. So a senator that says, no, I don't want to vote for a great Secretary of Defense like General Mattis, or a particular example, if you say that for everybody up and down the line, you're just fundamentally stopping Washington. And that's what Senator Warren is doing. And that is what I'm uniquely equipped to do based upon, a lifetime service record of reaching across the aisle. African American community, Asian American community, Latino American community. I've clerked for liberal judges. I've taught with liberal professors at Harvard. Basically because I think my principles, whatever they are, can stand the test of interacting with people who have a different experience of life. And we can come together to approach problems, reach a common cause, and figure it out. That's who we are as Americans.
So now, if somebody was to say, what is a Massachusetts Republican? Because, when you look, the square state Republicans seem to be a little different than what I see here in Massachusetts. Our governor, I don't know that he would fit the square state red model. But if we were to ask you, what would you call a Massachusetts Republican? How could you describe one?
Well, I believe, and the reason I'm in this race is that there is a new vision of Republican Party that can come uniquely out of this state, and frankly, I think spread across the nation. One that picks up on the great, great, great roots of this party. I go back to Frederick Douglass, the freed slave, great African-American Republican statesman of the mid-19th century. I use his line every day in the campaign, I will unite with anyone to do right and with no one to do wrong. He was a Republican. Of course, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves.
Well, the party of Lincoln.
The party of Lincoln. The party of Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, the man who broke the color line in baseball, was a Republican. The party of Ed Brooke, the first duly elected African-American senator in this country after Reconstruction, was a Republican here in Massachusetts. So we have a long history as a party of expressing fundamentally the values of freedom and liberty and dignity for everybody, inclusiveness, expressing the concept with passion and conviction that we care for everybody in all communities, left behind communities, and people of different immigrant groups. And I think that Charlie Baker is doing just a fine job of modeling that in the state. But I want to take that and I want to dial it up just a little bit stronger and a little bit broader and a little bit more capacious and a little bit more comprehensive, so that we're sharing with the people of Massachusetts and then ultimately the people of the nation a vision of what a true freedom, liberty, dignity-loving Republican Party looks like.
Well, I mean, Charlie and Karen, you get a kick out of it because they're living up to their campaign promises.
They sure are.
You know, you sit there and say, both of them came out and said, this is what we stand for. Mm-hmm. If you give us a chance, put me in, coach, I'll do this.
Absolutely.
And some people had a hard time saying he's really, and Karen, they're really living up to what they promised.
Absolutely are. Absolutely are.
I wish somebody would teach Washington that.
Well, that's exactly the theory of the campaign for me, right? Once I win the primary and I'm in the general election against Senator Warren, I'm going to take the case to the voters of Massachusetts and to the good people of Milford who are watching here and say, do you like Charlie Baker's style of reaching across the aisle? No side gets the entire part of a loaf, everybody gets part of a loaf. Do you like that style, or do you like Senator Warren's divisive style? I can effectively make the case, based upon my record, that I'm going to live up to the promises of the Baker administration here, take that same approach to Washington. And look, if you look at the, may bore some of your viewers out there, but I'll do the numbers for just a minute. Charlie Baker's polling in the 70s now as approval ratings. The most popular governor in the nation. Meanwhile, Senator Warren's, in the 50-ish range. It won't be a heroic task for me to get someplace in that 50 to 70 range that's there, that big gap that's there, and say, look, you guys want more what Governor Baker's delivering here. We can take that model to Washington. Washington does not have to be broken, and it does not have to be further divided by somebody like Senator Warren, and I can go there and make common cause reaching across the aisle to achieve that.
Now, I don't want to play the race card, but you've brought it up that you've made your career on reaching across regardless of race.
Yes.
What do you think in the media today when all we're spending time is talking about our president is a racist?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say generally, the leaders of our national dialogue right now are not setting terrific examples for our children and our grandchildren, as the case may be, and how to conduct our affairs in public life. And it's an unfortunate distraction, from doing the business, of governing effectively. I was at the Martin Luther King Jr. event on Monday morning in Boston at the convention center where Senator Warren spoke. And there was just an entire lineup of important public figures, our great Governor Baker, Senator Markey, Mayor Walsh, a variety of other public figures. And to a person, with one exception, they all spoke in a vein of, honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King, which was, look, a lot of people in the Democratic voices and Governor Baker expressed disappointment with where we are in some of these issues today, and it's very fair for them to express that disappointment. But they spoke in ways that were honoring the legacy, which was a spirit of bringing us together as Americans. That there is a promise out there, the promise that King talked about, that we can actually achieve together. Instead, Senator Warren spoke, blazing eyes and anger and divisiveness and commentary. And it was just so out of step, that I issued a release that was widely received and well received, to say, that's not the day. This is not the day. This is, understand there may be points of disagreement you have with the current administration, but this is not the day to bathe yourself in anger and division. This is the day to say, look, I have fundamental disagreements. I can concede to Senator Warren or whomever on the left, they have disagreements. But tearing down and dividing is not the way to building up the America of the strength we want, the potential we know we can realize, and the unity which is achievable.
And again, I guess the problem I have is you're honoring a great person, a person who believed in inclusiveness, a person who wanted all the positive attributes of America to be shared. You got to put your differences aside for 10 minutes, or don't. Mm-hmm. I'd be fine if you just said, I can't deal with it, I'm not talking.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to call us back to a day, in my service of this state, I'd like to call us back to a day where that was possible. A day in which, if it were President's Day, that we weren't, rolling out all sorts of grievances about, what George Washington might or might not have done once upon a time. I'm making that up, I don't really know. And then on Martin Luther King Day, we wouldn't use the day of honoring his legacy of vision and aspiration and possibility, and the sacrificial leadership that he showed in such a way as to grind an axe about something. There have to be times in American life where we leave our weapons at the door, right? We say, you know what? We have our disagreements, but we come together as Americans in this day to make common cause.
Today we celebrate being Americans. Period. Tomorrow, John, I can hate you, I can love you. We'll argue then.
It would be so much healthier for just regular Americans. The people of Milford, the people of Massachusetts, the people of this country, they don't really want screeds coming in on their television airwaves or across their computer screens every day from either side. They just want to live their lives with dignity, work hard, do the best for their children, hope that they can actually continue to do the right thing every day in their jobs. That's what people want. And every day that you get this barrage from Washington, and again, Senator Warren is the worst, and I promise I will be the best on that subject. That's what they want. They want something which is not dragging them down. I mean, at least stay neutral, right? Maybe Washington won't help them get to their answers, but at least stay neutral. Don't drag down their spirits. Exactly. Don't drag the spirits down today. I just want to have a nice night. I don't want to hear that, that rant going back and forth.
And the fundamental issue I have is I'm okay, John, if you get up and say, I believe this is the way. Let me show you a positive way to get this done. Okay. You have the right as an American. You have the obligation, if we elected you, to go make it happen. But to just say, no, I'm going to be against you no matter what. I mean, I was not a Barack Obama fan. The day he became my president, I certainly hope for his success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, and again, whether I love Trump or hate him, I want him to win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was, I've been at 3 of the last 5 inaugurals. I was at President Bush's inaugural, his first inaugural in 2001. Did that one by myself. I did President Obama's first inaugural in 2009 with my oldest daughter. And then I did President Trump's inaugural this year with my oldest son. agree, disagree. We're Americans, right? On these days, the peaceful transfer of power. When we need to figure out how to build confidence in governing institutions instead of just tearing it down every day. And again, the people are just tired of it. They're just weary. You could see it whenever you talk about this. When I bring this message anywhere, you can see the bone weariness of people saying, yeah, just give me a message of simple courtesy, simple respect, governing principles, and not dragging people down.
And, again, when you start looking, I had a recent interaction with a company where they just made a total mistake. And the woman at the end said, well, thank you for not yelling. And they forgot to deliver oil on time. My house ran out of oil. Not a pleasant thing in New England.
No, that's not good. Not the way it's been the last few weeks.
And it was funny because I said, well, will yelling help? Because if it will, I can yell. And she said, absolutely not. And I think that's the feeling I'm getting, saying, guys, show me you're doing something for me.
Yeah.
I'm paying your salary because either I did or enough people in Massachusetts thought you would represent our best interests.
That's exactly right.
But I don't feel it in Washington.
No, you don't. And what I observe, and I often say when I'm in audiences, in front of audiences, is, people get it done in Milford on a day-to-day basis. They get it done across Massachusetts. Be it on ball fields or in businesses or you shared ahead of going on the air that you've been running budget surpluses in town here in Milford. Magnificent, right? You've all figured out a way to come together, get it done. This country is amazing. We have 330 million amazing Americans. The human potential here is insane. And in so many areas of life, we're knocking the ball out of the park. In our business world, we're doing well. In some dimensions of our civic life, we're doing well. In our communities, we get on, we make it happen. But in Washington, that is the glaring exception. That is the one exception proving the general rule that people in America are figuring it out together and getting it done. And we can change that, and I will change that.
Now, you talk about Americans. If you go to Washington, you're going to deal with immigration policy.
Sure.
What are your views?
Well, I think this is another tremendous example of how tragic it is that the fighting up and down the spectrum won't let us come together to do some very, very, very obvious things that make sense. Take the issue of increasing border security. If you were to poll that, any community up and down the spectrum, you'd see 75% of the populace in favor of that, enhancing border security, which of course I'm in favor of. You take the issue of getting illegal immigrants here who are criminals and taking them back home, figuring out appropriate measures to do that, and that polls at, again, 75% plus. And of course I'm in favor of that. And then you get to the issue of illegal immigrants who are here and children thereof, the DACA, Dreamer folks, and a very high percentage of the population says, let's figure out a way to keep them here on the right terms. So one poll's at 75%, one poll's at 75%, one poll's everything's popular, and yet nobody comes together to get it done.
The Republicans are getting a bad rap. They're being pictured as the anti-kids, anti-DACA people.
That is unfair. It is unfair, and what you have to do is you have to articulate a vision, and this is why, again, back to that Washington is broken point, right? Somehow or other, there have to be sensible Republicans and sensible Democrats who were willing to take each one of those 75% plus polling positions and combine them together. Enhance border security. Make sure we've got good measures to get rid of illegal immigrants that are criminals. Number one, keep the bad guys out. Number two, the bad guys that are here.
Get rid of them.
Get rid of them. And number three, then we can figure out ways to make sure that there's a peaceable way to allow people to stay. Now, this community has felt the pain of number one and number two not working effectively. You know, the lack of enhanced border security, lack of border security, one, and two, not taking bad people and sending them back. In the tragic case of Matthew Denise a few years ago. So people know the pain of that, and it would be unfair for anyone to expect people to just go past those issues, because it really matters. Public security matters. People care about these things. They should care, and we all care, and go straight to well, how are we handling the Dreamers?
Do you believe that Trump really is against the DACA kids, or is he throwing it back at Congress saying the previous president did this by executive order?
Yeah.
To me, that's not right. This is a fundamental question. Congress should step up, work together, and come out with a policy.
Yeah, I
A
think
law, not a policy, a law.
Absolutely. It's unquestioned that the right protocol for this would be something which is legislative. We all understand that, and there should be enough consensus on this in the Senate and House. So I have to agree with President Trump on that. It's not an executive action; it should be a legislative action. And once a comprehensive solution is brought to bear. Then at that time, he gets to sign it.
Now, you've got enough experience in education. Maybe you can explain to somebody like me, what is an amnesty city? I don't understand the whole concept.
Well, it's because the concept doesn't make sense now, does it? There's no real...
Somebody comes into my house, breaks my furniture, and I can't throw them out?
Right.
I don't understand.
Yeah, this is again another one of those issues, which you can't understand it because there's no understanding to be had. It just makes no sense. You can't have individual cities go rogue against the rule of law and the country. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So there's no sense to be made of it. And let's just be clear on the subject. 75% plus of Americans agree on that. 75% plus of the people in Massachusetts agree on that as well. It's not, most of this is not hard.
But it's an opt-in. If I break the law in a host country, okay, and I'm there illegally anyway, why should I have the right?
Yeah.
When you hear people who have raped, pillaged, murdered, whatever, I guess I don't really feel they have many rights in my country. If they come in, like some of the DACA kids, put their heads down, work hard, and try and make a better life for themselves and their family, I got some sympathy.
Sure.
But if you're doing drugs or you're breaking my laws, why should I think you haven't just said, hey, John, I don't need any rights?
Well, I wish I could say anything really, really, really insightful on this subject other than to just agree with you, right? It feels as obvious as anything can feel, right? That's the way the law works. That's the way this great country works. It's an amazing country. It's an amazing country, and we have the biggest, most open, most charitable hearts of all people around the globe. We really do. But there are rules, there are laws, and we have to figure out a way that we continue to sensibly apply them, not only to people that are here as, born here as Americans, not only people here as legal immigrants, but also the people especially who are here as illegal immigrants and breaking laws while here. That seems like as obvious as it can get.
Years ago, Ross Perot, during a debate, was asked a question, and they gave him 2 minutes, and his answer was, "It's wrong." And they waited and said, "Would you like to expand?" He goes, "Nope, still wrong."
Yeah.
And to me, amnesty. Okay, so I'm going to decide.
So I wish I'd been smart enough to channel that great Perot line, but that's about the sum of it. You're right. There's not. You could talk about it round
I'm
and round
going to
and
decide I don't like a federal law.
Right.
And I get to ignore it. Okay, so if I don't like the IRS, do I get to ignore paying taxes? I'm asking everybody because, to me, It's just wrong.
Yeah. No, I mean, you and I could sit here in these nice chairs in front of your screens here and talk about it all night, and it would come back down to those two words: it's wrong.
It's wrong. Now, I've heard all these bad things about Trump. He's horrible. He destroyed the country. Yet when I look at my stock portfolio, did pretty good this year. And you know, I've heard that it was just a coincidence that everything started going right on the stock exchange, and he just happened to be there. What's your take on this?
Well, a few things, right? One is, you know, the stock markets are reflections of the fundamentals of an economy, ultimately, right? Over time, that's what, and the fundamentals of the American economy are great. You know, we've got, as I said earlier, 330 million amazing Americans, great American companies. We are doing a terrific job, you know, in our domestic economy, and we have a lot to be proud of. And yes, you know, a lot that the administration is doing in terms of regulatory rollback. I'm a big fan of regulatory rollback, sensible, prudent regulation, but not over-regulation. You know, sensible tax measures. Those all help unleash the forces of this fundamentally strong economy.
You know, when you think about it, people are feeling it now that companies are investing more, at least it seems that way. They're showing more profits. You know, and more I'm seeing companies do what I think is the right thing, which is to give back a little bit to all the employees.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to just say that you know, a way that I'm going to diverge, you know, from some standard you know, old line Republican you know, beliefs on this subject. I've always been a big free enterprise guy. I'm a big free enterprise guy, a big regulatory rollback guy, a big less taxes is better guy. But I do think that what's key when you're saying Washington shouldn't regulate these things and Washington should get out of the middle of it, agree with that. But what I do believe is that companies should be taking more responsibility for ensuring that their workforce is doing well, that they should care about the stakeholders of their employees. So you know, as you observed, like, you know, they're taking some of the proceeds from the tax bill and pushing them to their employees. In some cases, they're raising the wage going forward. Walmart did that, and that's obviously a bellwether company. And so, you know, in my view of the America to come, I want less Washington, but I want more responsibility, you know, by community leaders, civic leaders, business leaders, to take, you know, their role and say, you know what, I'm going to make sure my employees are well taken care of, and if I have to lay people off, and make sure that they're retrained. You know, these types of measures. You know, thinking about the long-term well-being of American communities.
We just went through a fundamental change in tax policy. Your views?
Start, as I mentioned before. Less taxes is always better than more taxes, right? You know, there's not too many.
To some people.
To almost anybody, when it comes down to them, that argue that. Look, I think that there's some good things about the tax reform bill that I'm pleased with. There's some other things that I wish were done a little bit better. You know, the things that I wish were done a little bit better. I would have liked to have seen, you know, more middle-class tax relief. You know, Senator Rubio was working on increasing the child tax credit. You know, if I were in Washington, you know, at the table, you know, nobody was at the table here representing Massachusetts, right? It's an entirely Democratic caucus here in the House and Senate, so nobody was there representing us. I'll get back to that in a minute. But I would have liked to have seen more middle-class tax relief and make this more pro, you know, middle-class working Americans, you know, generally. I'd also note that, you know, it was while it was good in some respects, you know, we didn't have a seat at the table, so we couldn't address things like state and local taxes treatment. You know, Susan Collins made some headway. Senator Collins from Maine the only Republican senator this corner of the country, made some headway in addressing that. But if I'd been there representing the state, would have made sure that Massachusetts' interests were well taken care of in that.
Now, as we start looking at what goes in my pocket, one way is to say deal with the taxes. The more fundamental issue, I mean, we're kind of a tiny microcosm here in Milford, but we approached taxes differently, which was controlled spending. And see,
well, now you're into my wheelhouse here. Yeah, I've been a big debt hawk for a long time, and you talk about the ways in which the failure to get along in Washington, the failure to lean in to make common cause is hurting us. There are many examples of it. We talked about immigration. There are sensible solutions, but they're not being reached. There are others such as the debt, right? Once upon a time, $1 trillion total debt was a big number. $5 trillion was a gargantuan number. We're at 20 trillion plus. And by the time,
rising.
And rising, $1 trillion a year at this rate. And so, I really, I love the idea of lower taxes, but I also love the idea of fiscal responsibility and figuring out a way to make sure that this all balances. Because, the short of it is that, our generation has been not taking care of its responsibility, right? We have overspent as a country in our generation, and what does that mean? That somebody else is going to have to pay it back.
My grandkids.
Your grandkids, your kids, everybody's going to have to pay it back that's coming after us. And one of the things that got me going in this was the idea that 20 to 40-year-old generation, and those younger that come after them, but thinking of the young adults right now, or younger adults, that somehow or other, not only are we showing them bad models of leadership, right? We're not leaving them a good form of governance, sort of, which they'll eventually step into leadership of themselves, but also we're saddling them with an enormous debt. We have to do something about that. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's a numbers issue, and it's a fairness issue. That it's old people right now, like me and you, sorry, but taking away from the young people, and that's just not right.
But is it not a congressional term issue, John, in all honesty? Senators, representatives, they live in a small number of years.
Yeah.
That's their lifetime. So if they get to overspend,
Yeah.
well, I'll deal with it next term. And earmarks, my favorite subject.
Well, let me go to the structural point. We'll get back to earmarks in a minute. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's something about the way the incentives of Washington that are not working. One of the, whatever disagreements I might have with President Trump on any variety of subjects, areas of agreement, otherwise, probably the area that I most agree with him was running against Washington, right? Yes. Saying Washington is broken. Now, I don't think it's a whole lot more fixed, a year later, and that's what I'm, working on now. Something about the structure is encouraging irresponsibility by our leadership and a lack of courage of conviction in aggregate.
But you said it. If they don't do their job, you shouldn't get paid.
Exactly.
When everybody argues about CEO and senior staff compensation being broken, I love the Lee Iacocca model. If I do my job, I am going to be very wealthy.
Yeah.
Because I'm taking all my compensation in stock.
Right.
So as an employee, as a stockholder, I want you to make $1 gazillion, because that means I made 100 gazillion.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's the same thing for Congress.
Sure.
If you can't do your job, then why am I paying you?
We have two principles there alongside each other. One, the wonderful Bill Belichick "do your job" principle, right? And the second principle is one of accountability. If you don't do your job, then don't get rewarded, don't get paid. I mean, this is an initial matter, and obviously don't get sent back.
Don't get reelected.
And somehow or other, it should not be acceptable to run the budget deficits that we're running, to pass tax relief without offsetting spending relief. That just shouldn't make sense. It shouldn't be possible, frankly.
And it amazes me because here in Milford, we're just not smart enough to do this deficit spending. One, it's against the law. But we start out saying we have $100 to spend.
Right.
Now, there's a few of us like me who, left to our own devices, would never spend enough. I'll admit it, we tuck it away too much, but you just don't spend more than 100.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go to Congress and say, right, wrong, or indifferent,
Yep.
here's your $100. That's what you get to spend.
Al, I love your approach here in Milford. It's the only plausible, sensible approach we should use anywhere. It's just the way it ought to be, and people, we ultimately know that. We know that in your own household, in the town of Milford, wherever it may be, you figure it out in a way that you don't overspend your means. And I think it's going to be it's a major threat to this country, the well-being of this country over time. There's going to come a day, as sure as can be, that it is going to be extremely painful for the American people that we have that much debt sitting out there in the
And
costs.
with all due respect, can you spell Greece? Can you? I mean, there's a number of countries that you sit there and say, if I was spending $1 more than my income, eventually somebody's going to take my house.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, I got enough saved away for now, but I don't know that my grandson does.
No, it's a law. It's a law of political and economic gravity, right? Just sure as if I take this globe and drop it here, it's going to fall to the ground. Eventually you run up a debt high enough, and there comes a time you have to pay, and it can be awfully painful when you do.
So I'm going to be mean and put you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
Earmarks. The pork that, the bacon that keeps on giving.
That's not a tough one. That's an easy one. You gave me a slam dunk question. No, I mean the fact that it's when I'm running against Washington and saying there should be structural changes to make it better, now they're floating the idea that they want to bring earmarks back. We know that's not the way it ought to work, and it will stand 100% against. I'm pretty confident it won't come back, because I think the Republican Party will have lost its moorings even more than they already have if that happens.
Well, I remember we had a project for Town Park. It was 20 grand, nice little earmark. And that mean old Governor Charlie Baker took it away. And we all growled till he said, well, I have choices to make. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to take health benefits away from children? Or do we take away these earmarks and you got to cut your own grass or plant your own trees?
Right.
When he explained it that way, mm-hmm. that there's a fundamental choice he must make as our leader.
Yeah.
And yeah, it would be nice to have some new grass in the town park that we didn't pay for.
Right.
But yeah, I can't argue with you. I'd like to, but I can't argue with you that children's health isn't more important than some extra trees in town park. It just seemed like common sense. The earmarks went away, and we couldn't argue them because he explained why.
He was right.
Yes.
Fundamentally, or to put it another way, the Ross Perot line, it's wrong. So taking away children's health under the circumstances in favor of the park, as much as you would like the park, is that
yes.
right? I get it.
Now, we have foreign policy that sometimes I don't understand. We're giving away a lot of money to people who don't seem to like us very much. Again, I'm just an old guy from the Heights here in Milford, and if I buy you coffee and you kick me in the leg, why do I want to buy you coffee again?
There's some rethinking that we need to do, doubling down on allies. I think that a strong America is a America with with the best allies in the world being fully supported, the UK and Israel and other such countries, top of those lists. But, if somehow or other we're countries are getting crosswise with us and we're digging into our pockets, that doesn't feel right now, does it?
Like I say, I buy you coffee, you kick me in the leg. Why am I going to buy you coffee tomorrow? My leg still hurts from yesterday.
Right. Well, we had, from my vantage point, the Obama administration, took a major step back in terms of the clarity of our projection of American interests around the world. The lines got muddled. Would create the line in the sand, and then it would get crossed, and then we wouldn't do anything about it, or we sent uncertain and mixed messages, to places like, North Korea, or obviously most prominently are not at all mixed message of Iran, which is very accommodationist. These things have left our world just a little bit more muddled at the end of the 8 years, and we need to get back to clarity of mind, conviction of purpose on where the American interests are abroad, and making sure we're absolutely dead certain in our communications on that subject. Now the good news is that one of the administration's I think great achievements is lining up tremendous generals. I'm a big fan of General Mattis, big fan of General Kennedy, General McMaster, Mike Pompeo. Those are terrific. We have terrific frontline figures, assessing where we are positioned around the world. So I'm very grateful for that.
But again, if you think back to the years of Reagan, not the most strategically brilliant man, right? But on the other hand,
I won't comment on that.
Smart enough.
I might defend him a little bit more.
No, but I'm just saying, if you look at history, he would not be the one that you say, wow, except for one area. He surrounded himself with incredible people.
Right, that's true.
In the words of Teddy Roosevelt, pick the right people, give them the right tools, and then be smart enough to know how to get out of their way.
That is what leadership is about, yes.
And I look, and when our previous administration drew a line in, well, I wish it was in the sand, it seemed to be in the air, because nobody really believed that you would cry. I don't know that people would make that mistake today.
I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say that we have as intelligent a group of administration officials who are overseeing our defense as any time we've had in our history.
And I think the president would step out of the way and let the generals do their job.
Well, I certainly trust them. They're the best professionals we've got, and we've got the smartest people in the world in those spaces, so I have a tremendous regard.
When you start talking about $1 trillion or a fraction of $1 trillion or anything like that, you say, well, if we're spending all this money, I hope we trust the people who are leading the defense to do their job.
That's exactly right. You have the best and the brightest, and your Teddy Roosevelt example, then you go along.
Get out of their way.
Exactly.
Point them in the right direction, say, go get the job done.
Exactly.
As we look overall at the economy, are we going the right way?
Well, I just wanted to circle back to your question about the defense again. Just one more moment.
Let's go to defense.
Just stay there for a minute, just briefly, and say, I think whatever our reflections are on the grand scheme of things, I just think that the voters of Milford, the voters of Massachusetts will ultimately make a judgment about who really understands basic principles of how to defend our country, about national security, about border security. Will be Senator Warren, who does not seem to have a clarity of mind on that subject. Doesn't seem to have a perspective in line with, I think, most average Americans would say, America's interest first, degree of clarity and coherence around these subjects. And that's what I can bring to this, is to, when Massachusetts residents are going to be voting in November of this year. To think about the subject, well, who do you want in Washington represented in Massachusetts' interests, leaning into these problems when you've got the Kim Jong-uns and the Putins of the world? Do you want, a John Kingston there to represent their interests, somebody who understands, the basic security interests needs of average Americans, or somebody like Senator Warren, who does not seem so clear on those subjects?
Well, also clarity. Talk to me about health care.
Well, that's an easy one to take on, right? How long do we have here? We have like another few hours, right? The area is so challenging. We know that. The complexities are many. But what we know is that fundamentally Americans don't like the big statist solutions that Senator Warren is peddling. She and Bernie Sanders and others are going for the national pay everything
One pay
plans.
system.
Exactly, which the single payer system for 330 million people is an unadministrable nightmare, and it's going to cost over and above the trillions that were already in the hole, the $20+ trillion debt we talked about. This is going to cost trillions and trillions and trillions more. And it won't get people what they ultimately want. They want an efficient marketplace of insurance that gets them to choose their doctors, that gets them not rationed on their health care, that gets them the best access to the best doctors in ways that ultimately is the most efficient. Now, we all know it's not easy to come up with a
Sure.
comprehensive. I think fundamentally here in Massachusetts we did a pretty fine job under Romney Care in 2006, coming together with a program which was a bipartisan approach to solving it on a state level. That's proportionate. You can figure out how you're going to take care of Massachusetts residents. It becomes very challenging to do it for 330 million people.
But John, I lived under socialized medicine. When my darling bride and I moved to Paris, the French socialized medicine system was the best thing I could hope for. You know why? Because I had Blue Cross. So all of her friends had to wait a month for this, couldn't get in for that. We whipped out an American Blue Cross card.
Yeah.
She got moved right to the head of the bus, and we had instant health care.
That's right.
So when people talk about how wonderful, the single payer system is, I keep thinking, it was great as long as I didn't have to participate in it.
The thing is that as bad as it can be in places like Canada with 40 million people, or France with order of magnitude, I think it's 60 million people, or the UK with roughly 60 million people, as great as the challenges can be in those places, it is nothing compared to what it will be in a country of 330 million. I mean, with so many divergent health circumstances, it will create a nightmarish bureaucracy that will be completely incompatible with what American interests are. And the ultimate consumers of healthcare, are citizens that would be on the receiving end of it, would find this a nightmarish scenario. It's not the way Americans are used to doing business in this area. We have to do better. We have to figure out how to make up for a better marketplace. We have to make for greater efficiencies, but it's always got to be consistent with the principle. We don't want rationing. We want people to be able to keep the doctors that they want, et cetera, et cetera.
But again, I remember how everybody talked about how wonderful it was. And my darling bride and I are looking at each other saying, yeah, for us, because I worked for a little company here in Milford called Waters, and they kept me on the American plan.
Right. The U.S. will not be well served by going to a plan that is not beneficent in much smaller scale in places like Paris.
So now we come to the end of our talk, unfortunately, because I've been enjoying this. John, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, if you think, Al, that Washington is working for you, if you think that the way that the politicians on the right and the left are coming together to make common cause, to advance your interests, if you think that Senator Warren is actually representing your interests, serving your interests, and getting the job done for Massachusetts, then she's perfect for the day. Send her back. If you think it's fully functional, with the anger, the partisanship, the polarization, the obstructionism, then she is perfect for that day. She's only cranking up the anger machine one more turn and making it that much more dysfunctional. But if you think that Washington could be different, if you think that there's a way in which, Capitol Hill could look a little bit more like Beacon Hill. I'm not saying Beacon Hill is perfect, by any means, but Charlie Baker and a Democratic legislature is getting things done. If you think that's the way, well, send me to Washington, because I'll be the person to make that happen.
Yes, and I may complain about Beacon Hill and Charlie took away my trees, but at the end of the day, it works. And when he explained it, dang, I couldn't argue.
Well, by comparison, here in our backyards of Milford or Massachusetts, it's working a lot better than it is in Washington. And we can do better than this. I know we can do better than this. And I know we can do better than Senator Warren's approach, which is not helping, it's hurting.
Thank you. And hopefully as we get closer to November, you'll come back and give us an update.
I look forward to that. Thanks so much for letting me be here with you.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, I thank you for joining. I've always said I'll never ask anybody watching the show to vote for a particular candidate, but I'll beg you to get educated and vote. Learn about the people that we're sending to Washington. Learn about what they believe. Learn about what they're doing, and then decide, are they in the best interest of Milford? And if you believe that the candidate is in the best interest of Milford, then vote for them. So as always, may God bless, good night, may tomorrow be a better night than tonight.
Not too long since I've been home.